Number 5. Last night, a friend quickly pulled me out of my house to catch the opening act at a local bar's music night. After a few drinks, I realized I had left my phone in my pocket. I checked the table we were sitting at, the bar, and the bathrooms, but couldn't find it. I used my friend's phone to call mine. After a couple of rings, someone picked up, let out a low, raspy giggle, and hung up. They didn't pick up when I tried again. Eventually, I gave up on finding it and went home. To my surprise, I found my phone sitting right on my nightstand, exactly where I had left it. Number 4. When I was a kid, I was usually the last one to get picked up by the bus driver for school. One day, I was waiting alone when a bus pulled up with no other kids on board. The driver smiled and told me to hop on. I had a bad feeling and asked where the other kids were. He said, "We'll get them now, just get on." He kept pushing, but I refused. He shrugged and drove off. A few minutes later, the real bus showed up, and I went to school like usual. My parents didn't know about it until I mentioned it later. In hindsight, they were worried and even made a few phone calls. Number 3. A few years ago, I rented an apartment from a friend of mine. He had just bought it, renovated it, and couldn't sell it, so I offered to rent it. After moving in, I started noticing something was off with the woman who lived next door. She was about 45 but looked much older. She'd stay up all night listening to Christian radio shows and speaking loudly to someone. It got so bad I went over and asked her to turn it down. She opened the door, and I saw inside. Her walls were covered with crosses and words like Jesus and angels. The place was dark with blacked-out windows and old yellowed carpets. There were cockroaches and dog waste everywhere, but no dog in sight. I asked her to keep it down, but she just stared at me and slammed the door. She turned the radio up even louder. The next night, my girlfriend stayed over, and I woke up in the middle of the night to see a shadow standing next to our bed, staring at us as we slept. At first, I thought I was hallucinating, but then the shadow started speaking. It was my neighbor, and she was holding something in her hand. She had broken into our apartment during the night and stood there, who knows how long, watching us. "You should lock your doors at night," she said before walking out. The next morning, I heard strange noises outside my window. When I looked, she was talking to herself in tongues, holding a plastic bag with what seemed like a rotting dead dog inside. The smell was unbearable. Terrified, I went to a neighbor's door and asked him about her. He told me that one evening while he was watching TV with his kids, she broke into his apartment, stood behind the couch, and stared at him holding a power drill. I was now seriously scared. I called the cops, and they informed me that she was a violent schizophrenic who hadn't taken her medication. They couldn't do anything unless she left her apartment. I waited for her to go out, and when she left at 2 a.m., I called the cops. They arrived in under 2 minutes, restrained her, and took her away in a van. After that, it was like she was never there. I never saw her again, but I still have nightmares about her staring at me in my sleep. Number 2. About 15 minutes before finishing my night shift, there was a huge crash on one of the office windows. I got up to check it out and found that someone had thrown a large rock through the window. This was strange because I worked in the industrial district, where there were no other businesses open at that hour. I called security and decided to head home. As I was leaving, I started to feel more paranoid and ended up running to my car, getting in and driving off. After a few minutes, I realized that I hadn't locked my car, even though it had been unlocked the whole time. I checked the back seat just in case, but there was nothing there. About 30 minutes later, I called a friend who was out drinking, and I decided to join him. On my way there, I was riding my bike down the road, enjoying the night, when I heard someone riding behind me. He passed me slowly, and when he was right beside me, he flashed a strange, insane smile. I flinched, confused, but then I realized something shocking. He was riding my mom's bike. I raced home, and sure enough, her bike was missing, and one of the back doors of my car was open. I hadn't opened that door myself. Number 1. I worked the night shift at a campground from 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. It wasn't too bad. I would bring my PlayStation 2 and play most of the night, only having to deal with 1 or 2 people on busy nights. I worked alone in this small 8x8 shack, surrounded by darkness. On my first week, the guy working the night shift before me told me about this payphone just outside the shack. He said it rang every night at exactly 4:17 a.m., just once. He